No one really noticed when Gregory Allen left New Hampshire. A man in his early 50s, he had once been a civil engineer, then a part-time math teacher, then, after the divorce, just a shadow drifting between rented rooms and half-hearted jobs. His only son had stopped replying to texts, his ex-wife had remarried, his mortgage had vanished with the sale of the house, but so had most of his identity. One night, alone in a snowstorm, Gregory typed places no one goes into a search engine. A thread appeared, forgotten villages in the Russian Far East, places barely on the map, where winters could last 8 months and the population could fit in a high school gym. One name stuck with him, Kalinovka. It sounded like a sigh, like a farewell. He liquidated his savings, bought a one-way ticket to Moscow, then a slow flight to Khabarovsk. From there, trains and buses thinned out until he was in the back seat of a milk truck, bouncing across roads of packed snow and dirt, speaking to no one except the driver, who only grunted. He had no plan, only the desire to disappear somewhere, so deeply that no part of his old life could follow. When he finally arrived in Kalinovka, the wind cut through his coat like knives. The village was a smear of wood and smoke across a frozen field. Less than 300 people lived there, and most were old, but not everyone. Gregory rented a room in an abandoned barn behind a retired railway worker's home. He spent his days walking the perimeter of the village, trying to make sense of this new silence, and it was there, near the edge of the frozen lake, that he first saw them. 2 young women, maybe in their late 20s, identical faces, framed by thick black scarves. One had a silver ribbon on her braid, the other carried firewood in both arms like it weighed nothing. They looked at him without fear, then they looked at each other and smiled. He would later learn their names, Yelena and Irina, twins, born minutes apart, raised like mirrors, almost never seen without the other. Their parents had died when they were teenagers. They had stayed in Kalinovka while everyone else left for the cities. That day, they said nothing to Gregory, just nodded and walked past. But something had shifted. It was like he had stepped into the pages of a story no one had told before. The days in Kalinovka blurred like a slow dream, white skies, thick boots, silence broken only by the creak of old wood or the distant bark of a dog. Gregory chopped wood for the old man he lived behind. He helped patch fences. He ate simple food and slept under a heavy wool blanket, grateful for numbness. But the twins kept appearing, sometimes by the well, sometimes walking across the frozen lake, sometimes inside the only store in the village, a dim-lit wooden shack with pickled beets, soap, and flour. Yelena wore the silver ribbon. Irina did not. That's how he began to tell them apart. One evening, Irina offered him a potato. It was nothing, just a gesture in the cold, but it felt like the first word in a new language. Weeks passed. The twins invited him for tea. Inside their home, a tiny cabin lit by oil lamps. The air was warm with the scent of birch and black bread. They spoke little English, and Gregory spoke no Russian, but the silence between them wasn't empty, it was soft. They taught him how to prepare the samovar, how to wrap his hands in cloth before carrying hot kettles. Yelena would watch him carefully, correcting his movements with a slight nudge. Irina would laugh when he got it wrong. They lived alone, no husband, no brothers, only the two of them, fiercely bonded in a world that had long since stopped paying attention. Slowly, Gregory began to return, for tea, then dinner, then firewood, deliveries, then no excuse at all. They started speaking in simple words, pointing, teaching, laughing. It wasn't fast, but it was real. One night, during a windstorm, the lights in the village died. Gregory arrived soaked, snow dripping off his shoulders, his flashlight flickering. They let him in without a word. The 3 of them sat by the stove, wrapped in blankets, sharing a single candle. The warmth of the room pressed against them like breath. Irina fell asleep on his shoulder. Yelena didn't move away. He looked at her. She looked back. No one spoke. But something had already begun. Gregory had not touched a woman in 7 years, not since the divorce, not since the silence that followed it swallowed everything else, but in the weeks after the blackout. Something between him and the sisters shifted, not spoken, never spoken, but clear. Every visit lasted longer, every shared glance lingered. The way they moved around him, in perfect sync, like gravity was gently pulling them into one orbit. One night, he brought over a jar of American peanut butter from the bottom of his bag. Something he'd carried all the way from home. They spread it over black rye bread and tried it for the first time. Verena wrinkled her nose. Yelena smiled and nodded. It was absurd, but it was theirs. In that cabin, time stopped meaning anything. The cold outside was endless, but inside, everything grew warmer. Then came the night when neither sister asked him to leave. He slept on a cot near the fire, his back to them. But the silence between them pulsed with something and said. The next night, there was no cot. They laid down a fur blanket, one bed, one space, no explanations. Yelena rested on his left, Verena on his right. They didn't speak. He didn't question it. In the West, it would be madness. Here, it was survival. Or maybe something deeper, something the world had forgotten. The days after blurred into a rhythm. Chores, meals, laughter, nights in shared warmth. He was no longer a guest. He was a part of the house. The villagers noticed, but no one said anything. Only the old storekeeper, one day, handed Gregory a sack of flour and muttered something in Russian. The word for family was all he could catch. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Yelena missed a period. 2 weeks later, Verena did too. Gregory didn't ask. He didn't need to. The twins exchanged a glance. Verena took his hand. Yelena nodded slowly. No shame, no drama. Just a quiet, solemn fact. They were both carrying his children. He sat down, breathless. They stood beside him. And in that silence, a new life began. News travels quietly in places like Kalinovka. There was no internet, no newspaper, no town square. But somehow, by spring, everyone knew both twins were pregnant and the American man was still living under their roof. Most villagers didn't speak of it directly. Some looked away. A few nodded with quiet respect. But Gregory felt the shift. One morning, a farmer passing with his cart simply muttered, "Semistvo," and pointed at Gregory's chest. Family. The word rang louder than any sermon. Gregory hadn't expected this. Not the pregnancy, not the way the twins smiled every time they placed his hand over their growing bellies, not the way he found himself talking to the babies in a language none of them spoke, whispering fragments of his past into a future he couldn't imagine. He chopped more firewood than necessary. He fixed parts of the cabin that weren't broken. He paced the frozen fields, asking questions to the wind. How would this work? Could it? One night, Verena asked him half English, half body language if he planned to leave after the births. Gregory froze. Yelena stared quietly, her hand resting over her stomach. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to the hearth, and lit the lamp. The fire danced on the walls, illuminating the three of them, this strange and impossible trio bound together by circumstance or maybe something more. I don't know what the rules are, he finally said, his voice trembling. But if you'll have me, I'll stay. Verena smiled. Yelena blinked fast, eyes glistening. No one needed a wedding, no priest, no certificate. The next morning, the villagers saw Gregory carrying firewood with both twins at his side, arms intertwined. They didn't look away. Some even smiled, as if to say, "You are one of us now." The snow began to melt in April. Rivers broke free from their frozen silence. The forest creaked with new life. And inside the small wooden cabin at the edge of Kalinovka, something even more miraculous stirred birth. Yelena was first. It happened just before dawn. Gregory was asleep when he heard her breathing shift, slow and deep. Verena, already awake, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," she whispered. The village midwife came in, old woman with hands like bark and eyes like still water. No machines, no monitors, just instinct and quiet courage. Gregory held Yelena's hand, whispering anything he could remember from those prenatal books he once flipped through in a different life. She screamed once, just once, and then it happened. A cry, small, fierce, live. The boy. Gregory looked at the tiny face, pink and wrinkled, and wept, not for fear, not for confusion, for grace. Yelena held the child like she had always known how. Verena kissed both their foreheads. Gregory sat in stunned silence, his heart split open in a way he couldn't explain. 2 weeks later, it was Irina's turn. A girl. This time, Gregory didn't hesitate. He held Irina's face between his hands as she pushed, whispering the only Russian words he had fully learned by then. Ty Silanaya. Ty moya semya. You are strong, you are my family. The girl was born into sunlight pouring through the frost-glazed window. Now there were 4 in the home, then 5, then 6. When Gregory made a crib by hand from fallen birch, no one asked whose child was whose. The twins mothered both babies as one. And Gregory, he felt like a man walking in a dream he never wanted to wake from. The village watched, curious but quiet. The storekeeper gave them extra milk without asking. A neighbor dropped off wool. One old man carved a small wooden spoon set for the children. No one said marriage. No one said sin. In Kalinovka, things just were. And Gregory, once a forgotten name in New Hampshire, now woke up every day to tiny cries, steaming porridge, and to women who loved him in a way that had no name but needed none. The summer came slowly, like a shy guest. The babies began to smile. Irina would hum lullabies while Yelena organized bundles of herbs to dry by the window. Gregory, with a child strapped to his chest, fixed the fence that always leaned a little to far east. Each day was ordinary. Each day was sacred. But time, as always, pressed forward. One evening, after putting the children to sleep, Gregory sat outside with Irina and Yelena under a purple sky. The stars blinked slowly over the quiet fields. A soft breeze carried the scent of cedarwood. I keep thinking, he began, then paused. Irina turned. Yelena reached for his hand. I should go back, just for a little, tie up some things, sell what's left, maybe, bring back what we need. Silence. Yelena didn't speak, but she nodded. Irina looked down. Then, with a calm voice, said, if you go, we wait. Gregory swallowed hard. In the village, people didn't talk about leaving. Not because they were forbidden, but because there was nowhere else they needed to be. But he had one last door to close. He returned to America for just 4 weeks. His house had been sold. His name was barely remembered. The noise, the rush, the emptiness, it all felt like fiction. He finalized documents, sold old clothes, cleared what little debt he still had. When a border agent asked, returning home, he answered, yes. But he didn't mean the U.S. when he arrived back in Kalinovka. It was dusk. He opened the cabin door and saw Irina holding their daughter, Yelena nursing their son. Both looked up. Neither said a word. He stepped inside and whispered, I'm back. That night, as snow gently began to fall again, Gregory stood outside once more. Behind him, to women who loved him. Inside, to children who carried his name in blood and breath. He thought of everything he had lost and everything he had found. In the coldest place he'd ever known, he had discovered the warmest truth. Sometimes, to build a family, you must forget everything you were taught about love. And in a village no one would ever write about, a man once broken became something whole. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in love beyond borders. Leave a comment. Would you stay in the village or return to the world?